So this is our 50th Lunch and Learn webinar. So we are very happy to celebrate this milestone with you today. The topic of today is the journey from entrepreneurship to philanthropy. And I will tell you a word about that in a few minutes. I just want to take a few minutes to thank the chair's partners that you can see below that help us, run these programs and this series of webinars and other activities throughout the years. I would like to start with a few housekeeping rules on the next slide. So just remember that this seminar is being recorded. It will be replayed later on. We have a YouTube channel where we store these seminars. By default, please put your camera on. It's great if you can see your face. The microphones are off. We will let you open them when we do the Q&A, the questions. It's great if you can do a right click on your name to indicate your name and organization if you want. So you can rename yourself in order to show who you are to the other participants. I would like to remind you that we have two ways to interact with the guest speakers. The first one is to write directly in the chat. We also have a very active team at the Philanthropy Chair in the chat. So some content will be shared in the chat as well. We will look at your questions and select them for the speakers. And you will also have the opportunity to raise your hand if you want to ask a question with your microphone. So you can do both, especially after the presentations. We have dedicated time for Q&A. As I said, the webinar is recorded, and we are very happy to start now. Before I will present the topics and the guests, I would like to share with you just a small infographic that we did for the 50th edition of the Lunch and Learn seminar. It's just a way to show you what we've done. So as you can see, we have covered a wide range of themes, but among the mostly covered is our international comparisons. We love doing that, especially because we want to understand philanthropy in France in a comparative perspective with other traditions and places in the world. So most, the category with the most seminars were international comparisons. Then we had a lot of webinars on strategy and the governance of foundations. And also the relationship between philanthropy and the state and public authorities. We also like history. I know that one of our guests is a historian by training, so we also did a lot of content about the history of philanthropy, the relationship with philanthropy and the economy, and as you can see, many other topics. We are happy to have all the time, I would say, a duo of practitioners and academics. So this is reflected in all the invites, the guests that we had over the years, almost 100 now. And as you can see also in the areas covered, we try to promote more knowledge about philanthropy in France, but not only. We had more than a quarter of our seminars on European countries, but we also covered America, Africa, Middle East, and Asia as well. And our audience is growing. We are very happy to have many of you present today. So this infographic will be shared with you after the seminar and will be on our website. But it was just a way for me to celebrate the 50th edition and giving you some historical patterns of what we've covered over the years. So thank you again for being here. I would like now to introduce the topic and our guests. Today, we will talk about the journey from entrepreneurship to philanthropy. The goal of this seminar is to document a process that is quite common when people engage in I would say, in an organized form of philanthropy. And this is especially true for what we call here entrepreneurial philanthropy. So philanthropy by entrepreneurs, people who created or inherited their wealth through a business activity, and who decide to invest significant resources to achieve some social or environmental objectives. And we will focus on I would say the process or the voyage that these people do when they go from their entrepreneurial activities to the philanthropic activity. And as we will see, this is, this is a journey that is challenging. It's rarely straightforward. There are many ways in which people can get involved in philanthropy. And I'm very happy to have two distinguished guests to discuss this with us. So first, I will introduce Mairi Maclean, who's a professor of international business at the University of Bath in the UK. Mairi is also joined by her co-author, Charles Harvey. I'm very happy also to welcome Charles, who's a professor at Newcastle University and is a professor of business history and management. And both are co-authors of a very interesting paper that we'll talk about today called Identity, Storytelling, and the Philanthropic Journey. And it's part of a research program on entrepreneurial philanthropy, which is very fascinating. And I'm happy to have Mairi for presenting the paper and Charles, of course, to participate in the conversation. So I would like to thank Mairi and Charles for being here with us today from the UK. And from Switzerland, joining us, I'm very happy to welcome Etienne Eichenberger. Hello, Etienne. Etienne is the co-founder and partner of WISE Philanthropy Advisors. It's a very well-known and recognized philanthropic advisory firm in Europe. For the past 20 years, Etienne and his colleagues have provided personal service to many entrepreneurs and families engaged in philanthropy. So Etienne has a very hands-on and long experience with these people that we will talk about today. And Etienne, together with colleagues from the IMD Business School in Switzerland, also published a very useful tool, which is called the Family Philanthropy Navigator. And to me, the Navigator is a very good tool to use during this philanthropic journey. So Etienne will talk about that in the second presentation. I'm very happy to have you as guests, and I think we can get started now with the presentations. I first would like to launch the first poll, and you will see it's a poll that's a little bit humoristic. If entrepreneurial philanthropy were a journey, which song would be the ideal soundtrack for that? So unfortunately, I won't be able to play the songs, but you can have Give It Back from Sharon Jones, What a Difference a Day Makes by Dinah Washington, Redemption Song by Bob Marley, A Seat at the Table by the Vamps, and Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones. So which soundtrack would you pick if you were to document an entrepreneurial philanthropic journey? We will give you a few minutes more to vote. Thank you for those of you that have already voted. So which song would be the perfect soundtrack for this journey? Okay, we have about 60 votes now. In just a second, we will share the results. And it will probably, I see the results right now. I think there is a clear winner. Would you like to show the results, Anne? That would be great. Okay, so I think making a difference is the first, choice. What a difference a day makes. Give it back. I think it's interesting, the give back motivation. I think it's great to have it. And third, I think the third is personal fulfillment with the Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones. Okay, thank you for participating in this poll. I think it's a nice segue into our first presentation. I'm quite happy now to leave the floor to Mairi for our first presentation. Mairi, would you like to take over the screen, maybe?
I'll do my best.
Excellent.
Just see if I can get down here. Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, Arthur, for inviting myself and Charles here today. We're so pleased we're honoured, in fact, to be at your 50th birthday party. We hadn't realised it was the 50th birthday party, so many congratulations in that. And thank you for that wonderful poll to introduce our talk, which I will never forget. So this talk today is about the journey, the personal journey from entrepreneurship to philanthropy. So my name's Mairi Maclean. I'm from the University of Bath, UK, and I'm here today with Charles Harvey, my partner in crime from Newcastle University, UK. We came to the topic of philanthropy through the study of business elites, interestingly in France and the UK, which was very interesting. And one day we were in Lyon with David Courpasson. We were talking about elites and we got talking about philanthropy. And he came up with the question, what do they do with all the money? And it was a rather insistent question that wouldn't go away, and it stayed with us forever. So our research, it's a large research project on entrepreneurship and philanthropy. We've been doing it now for so many years, I'm not quite sure how to quantify that. It's a quantitative and qualitative study. It involves some cross-national comparisons, but today we're just going to be looking at one important aspect, and that is about the journey, the personal learning journey from entrepreneur to philanthropist. So our research questions are fourfold in this talk. How do entrepreneurs get involved in philanthropy? What transitions and changes take place as the philanthropic journey unfolds? What are the main rewards and satisfactions that stem from active involvement in philanthropy? And you've just had an introduction to these. And what are the implications for practice? So it's entrepreneurs and philanthropy, they're actually linked in many ways. There's a natural affinity between them. They're linked by innovation, creativity, openness, disponibilité, as the French would say, openness to change and ambition. Entrepreneurs strive for improvement in the provision of goods and services. They want to make things better. Philanthropists are striving to improve life chances, living conditions, health and environment of others. So they both involve an active pursuit of causes and the accumulation in a Bourdieusian sense of economic, social, cultural and symbolic capital. So it's all about this transformational character of what they're doing and also what happens to them in the process. And one of the interesting things from our research is that self-made entrepreneurial philanthropists, their lives are often subject to a more sweeping transformation. And it can be quite an emotive subject, moving from entrepreneurship to philanthropy. Often they don't know what to do. They may sell a business and become relatively rich overnight, having been feeling actually relatively poor. So we define entrepreneurial philanthropy, and this is from a paper lead authored by Charles Harvey on Andrew Carnegie. So we define it as the pursuit of entrepreneurs on a not-for-profit basis of big social objectives through the active involvement of their economic, cultural, social and symbolic resources. So they're applying key performance indicators, rates of return. They're applying business-like methods when they're making social investments. But they invest so much more than money. They invest their time, their connections, their know-how, their name, their brand. And they like to leverage investments and frequently partner with others, including other big philanthropists and governments, agencies. And they believe in helping others to help themselves. They're not interested in actually giving handouts. So the old adage of teaching a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime, to give him a fish and you feed him for a day is actually very, very relevant. So entrepreneurial philanthropists employ a share of their wealth in pursuit of philanthropic ventures over which they can exercise control. They want to be able to be in charge of what they're doing. They're concerned with impact, with making a difference, as we saw in the poll, and measuring that impact, applying these business-like methods. But they don't want to be there forever in a permanent funding situation where they're seen as one of those guys with money. So one interviewee described it as becoming a tough giver. So the theoretical perspectives, a lot of what we do goes back to Bourdieu, but entrepreneurial philanthropists, they're exercising an increasingly extensive policy-making and agenda-setting role in Western societies. They're emerging as nodal actors. And we need to know more about the impact of their philanthropy on social change agendas. But relatively little is known about the philanthropic learning journeys that they go through, which underpin their involvement in these large-scale philanthropic adventures. And exploring these personal trajectories shines a light on philanthropic interventions as a vehicle for the self to become, a vehicle for them to change in terms of the capacity it offers to change the story of the self. Some of the things that entrepreneurs have said to us in meetings have been, you know, philanthropy sets an example to the world. It's visible and it's making a point to society. It can never replace statutory funding, but it's often more nimble. So 1 million from philanthropy, £1 million or euros might be able to do what 10 million euros from a state could do. And there's an important social justice aspect to all of this. Society is increasingly fractured and inequalities are getting greater and more visible. Executive pay has reached ridiculous levels in many cases, and you cannot as a society continue with these differentials like that being maintained. So there's a strong social justice aspect to what they're doing. So the research itself was based initially on life history interviews with 20 British-based entrepreneurial philanthropists. So we later supplemented that with further interviews as occasion arose. We did life history interviews with philanthropy professionals, thought leaders, as the opportunity arose, and we've carried on doing these interviews. Typically, they've lasted an hour and a half, 2 hours, and the transcripts are typically 10,000 words long. But there are two main things that we look at in this paper. One is the journey itself, and the second is the philanthropic rewards that they gain from it. And the analytical categories emerged from reading and rereading the data, discussing them, and agreeing between the team. So Pierre Bourdieu, one of the things he says about interviews is that he talks of the joy of expression, which interviewees often feel in telling their stories. And as interviewers, we share in that vicariously. So the interviews themselves are often very moving in their own way. So very often, the learning journey is made by couples who become partners in philanthropy. It's not an easy thing to do philanthropy on your own without involving your spouse or partner and your children, because succession is important. As one interviewee said, it's very important that we grow and have this vision together, as it's such a transformative experience. In fact, sadly, that particular interviewee who was engaged in philanthropic ventures with her partner and husband went on, unfortunately, to get divorced. So this experience of traveling this path together was not ultimately successful, although their philanthropy has continued. So becoming philanthropic, it's about becoming active as an entrepreneurial philanthropist. You need the means, motivation, and know-how to do so. Motivation is revealed in life histories through family background. Dispositions are shaped by family background, the desire to get involved. So perhaps there might be a jam jar on the kitchen table each time there was a crisis, and as one interviewee described, pennies, cents might be put into it, not necessarily a lot of money, but shaping a disposition. And then in later life, the ability to become philanthropic is there, it's been seeded. Landmark events are very important. They trigger transitions in the philanthropic journey. That could be selling a business, the jackpot, suddenly hitting the jackpot from having felt relatively poor. But it could also be a personal tragedy, illness, a loss of a loved one, things that make you think again. I was going to tell you a story about a guy from the Northeast, but now that I've only got 20 minutes, I'll save him I'll save him for the future. So this is the story of Gareth. Gareth sold his business in 2006, and 2 years later, his mother died of cancer. So selling a business and suddenly becoming well off can leave the would-be philanthropist feeling overwhelmed, not knowing what to do. So this is very important, the thing he says here. He says, he was sitting in the south of France, 2 little beautiful girls, house in Berkshire, everything's perfect. And his mother dies. And he said, I think another thing is when I sold the business, I didn't know. I felt like I wanted to start giving, but I didn't know how to, or who to give to, or what way to do it. I hadn't a clue. No one teaches you how to be philanthropic. So that's a really important thing that he's saying here. The implication being that if somebody did help you, how beneficial would that be? This particular character, Gareth, things become meaningless for him when he sells his business. So he described how he would be at a dinner party and somebody would say to him, what do you do? And he would say, oh, I'm having a career break. And people would think he was unemployed. So they would just ignore him. And he said it was a really good lesson. So this is our stylization of the philanthropic journey, where you can see phase 1 is very much entrepreneurial oriented, business creation. Phase 2, there's a transition going on. There's a continued focus on the business and wealth management, but complemented by determination to help improve the lives of others. And then moving into phase 3, when they kind of withdraw from frontline business activities to focus much more on their philanthropy. And obviously this can be chronological. You can imagine that somebody might, as they get older, move through these phases. At the bottom, you see we've put landmark events. So there can be more than one of these landmark events. There could be selling a business and some other kind of dramatic event. So obviously dispositions are important in the charitable antecedents aspect. So a pre-existing interest in Africa is not uncommon, or the impulse that charity should begin at home. That's really powerful, with the hometown, the home community, the region or country, where there may be real poverty of ambition and aspiration. As one interviewee said, there's no need for me to go to Africa. There's enough poverty of aspiration here in Glasgow without me traveling further. The example of Andrew Carnegie actually comes up a lot. It's been a motivation for quite a few philanthropists, as well as the forming of dispositions in childhood. And these landmark events can be extremely powerful. Selling a business, sudden experience of affluence, hitting the jackpot, and the availability of time which may come with selling a business. Or perhaps less fortunately, a personal tragedy, a car crash. Justin Welby, our Archbishop of Canterbury in the UK, his daughter died in a car crash in 1983. And he says that that's what changed him from being an oil executive to becoming what he is now, a man of the cloth. There's a very poignant story was told by one entrepreneurial philanthropist that we call Miles. And he was on the slopes of K2, and he's there with his Sherpa, and his Sherpa suffers a collapsed lung. And for 4 days, a lot of people get left to die in these places, but for 4 days, Miles carries this Sherpa down the mountainside. And then he wakes up one morning, frostbitten, dehydrated, and a little girl is looking after him. And he decides life is going to change. And he experiences this whole K2 episode as a rebirth, a second birth. And afterwards, he becomes involved in microfinance in Africa. So some findings from what we've said so far. So the most common landmark events that are the sale of the business, a business going public, quitting as an executive in favor of a non-executive career, illness, the death of a loved one. And in the transitional phase, a large number of budding entrepreneurial philanthropists, they get tired of writing checks and they decide to become more focused on their giving. And during this transition, many of them benefit from having a guide to help them work through critical issues, such as the distribution of wealth, preferred causes, decision-making, and working methods. So this is really important. A guide can help them find ways of working out how to give money away, how to do that. A lot of careful thinking is needed in advance before embarking on this journey, helping to avoid the pitfalls and providing advice from someone who may have navigated the path before. So this is the notion of the guide. Philanthropists often begin haphazardly, writing checks. And this is followed by the dawning realization that actually it might be better to be proactive. The guide can initiate them into the ways of philanthropy in terms of navigating the path. And I noticed that's a word that Etienne uses, avoiding pitfalls, deciding where their interests lie as a family, what their priorities are. And it's important to say at this stage that interviewees experienced failures as well as successes. And there's a need to give money away intelligently, to do it right. It is possible to make matters worse as well as better. And the guide can help with this, to help donors engage in thoughtful philanthropy or thought through philanthropy. So these are the satisfactions you've seen already. I'm very glad to see that making a difference made the most difference. When we came up with this, we initially envisaged it as a hierarchy, you know, the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs with personal fulfillment at the top. And we called it, in Rolling Stones fashion, it was the stairway to heaven. So I was pleased to see satisfaction getting played at the beginning. But when we presented this typology to philanthropists, because we had personal fulfillment at the top, they said, no, no, no. The most important one is actually joining the club. That was the most important one for them, which was incredibly revealing to us. So this from our original interviews, how they featured within these interviews. People would use these words, giving back, making a difference, absolving the self. We struggled with how to call that. Initially, we called it doing the right thing, but that didn't quite get it, because there is an element of guilt that comes with the accumulation of inordinate wealth, and that, you know, is maybe better to own up to it. And as one interviewee said to us, you know, being philanthropic is better than feeling guilty. So I realized that I may be running out of time, Arthur. I'll speed up. I'll do it as fast as I can. But if you want me to stop at any moment, just say. So looking at these categories, the bottom quotation here comes from a guy who had made money in buses. He had been he'd been an accountant, and he managed to sell his business. Sorry, somebody's knocking at my door. I might be completely, sorry. I'm just giving a lecture. Sorry about that. I'm in my office. He'd made his money through the buses and privatization of buses. And suddenly they came into a fortune, him and his wife. His wife said to him, we can't possibly keep it, it's obscene. And he felt that since the money had come from all these people in Newcastle and Sunderland, Geordies and Mackems, 50 pences that they'd paid, that's where the money should go back to. Making a difference, AIDS, unemployment. This guy, Ian, is talking about how unemployment is huge. Lots of them have AIDS. This is a place in Africa where he was helping. But he tries to make a difference. If they've got a home and somewhere to start from, he can go down there and he can actually visibly see that he is making a difference. This is the tricky one, the absolving the self one. So the guilt associated with wealth can increase as wealth accumulates. Several participants drew parallels between themselves and Andrew Carnegie, who distributed most of his wealth during his lifetime. And one interviewee, Phil, was also motivated by faith. And he said it was his duty to support the people who Jesus visibly helped all his life, the poor, the sick, the homeless. But it's also about recognizing the responsibility of having been lucky and successful, and that with that comes a certain responsibility. The notion of living a good life is also something that rings true for philanthropists. How do you actually go about living a good life? So this is the one they put top of the pops. One interviewee said to me, you know, yesterday I was on the stage in Leicester Square, sharing the platform with the then Prince Charles, Helen Mirren, and Anton Deck, who you won't know, but they're a couple of well-known people on the telly in the UK. And he said, you can't buy that. So this idea of mingling with these very important people, getting a seat at the table, is really powerful, a powerful motivation for philanthropy. And the second quotation here comes from a guy who was an employment agent. He's got a big employment agency, he founded it, and he says, you know, I wouldn't want to be part of this world and just thought of as an employment agent. When people asked you, what did you do with your life? Oh, well, I was an employment agent, a great employment agent. And then he says, but you know, getting into this philanthropy, it gives you a third leg. And if you lose one leg, you've still got two legs to stand on. So the lessons for practice. There's a logic to the philanthropic journey, and I'm sorry I've bolted through it at such a speed, that might inform the practice of emergent philanthropists and philanthropy professionals. Giving back and making a difference to communities of origin are powerful motivators to entrepreneurial philanthropists. The guide is very important. You can get things wrong as well as right. In educating and enabling the philanthropist, and training may be beneficial for potential guides. The philanthropist should invest in only what he or she can really understand, know, and work with. And becoming an expert, active, engaged philanthropist puts the individual and couple back in the driving seat. But one of the things that really comes across from our research is the powerful stories told by philanthropists. They're inspirational, they're poignant, they're often moving. They're vehicles in their own right for inspiring further philanthropy. And because of their inspirational stories, philanthropists themselves are often the best advocates to encourage more giving and to encourage other potential philanthropists to get involved. So in conclusion, we'd like to underline the potentially transformative powers of philanthropic intervention to change the story of the self, both for the individual and for others. It creates the possibility to author a new script, paint a new picture, rewrite the story. You can be an oil executive, you can become Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and care about people rather than oil and money. It's also about changing the archetypal image. So for many years on our screens, we've seen the archetypal image of the starving African child, and we still see it on our screens, needing clean water or needing medication. This is a sort of passive, never-changing image. So replacing that with a new image of, say, an aspirational, high-flying, young woman, educated, going places, redolent of positivity and ambition. That was one of the pictures that one philanthropist we interviewed painted to us, and he said, we want to create these images. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Mairi.
I'll stop sharing my screen. I'm sorry if I went over time.
No, it's fine. Don't worry. It was really, really interesting. So thank you, Mairi, and thank you for sharing that research with us. We have just a couple minutes for clarification questions, maybe for Mairi and Charles, who also participated in this research. I just want to mention that I just shared the link to the paper, and I think my colleagues also shared other research, but The paper in particular that you mentioned in human relations, I think is free access. It's an open access link. So, which is a big issue, you know, in academia. Many papers are behind paywalls. And so this one is, you know, you can read it for free and in full length. So we have a few minutes or seconds for questions. You can write them in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question. We will have ample time for more questions after the second presentation by Etienne. So let me see. I don't see any raised hand now. So maybe we will, yeah, we have nice comments in the chat for you. So we have a question from Jelena. Did anyone refer to motivation stemming from tax breaks in the interviews?
That's very interesting. Hello, Yelena. I know Yelena from the University of Bath. Hello, Yelena. We've actually written a paper on this called Give It Back, George, when they changed the tax rules in the UK. And there was a big campaign led by the third sector and philanthropists to change the rules back. And they had never worked together. It was the first time that the philanthropists in the UK had ever united over anything, but they were able to unite against not letting their tax breaks get worse, and they won. So no, I think that, you know, when you're interviewing people, you have to let them say what they want to say, and semi-structured interviews are better, so you have to let them talk. Some of the people that we interviewed were actually tax exiles, and this seems to, doesn't seem to present a contradiction to them. It is so obviously a contradiction, and yet it seems not. If they do worry about it, if they do get sleepless nights, there was no sign of that in the interview.
Thank you, Mairi, for clarifying this interesting question by Jelena. We may have time for a second question. I'm also thinking whether my colleagues have questions. Anne, do you want to ask a question, maybe?
Maybe I want to know the story about the guy in the Northeast that you skipped.
Oh, yeah, George. Yeah, I just get my notes out. He was, so this is a guy who, oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry. Well, there's two guys in the Northeast. I'll tell you, can I tell you about Patrick instead? This guy, Patrick, he's the owner manager of a large car dealership. And but when he was at school, he couldn't read. He struggled to read. And I think that made him on the side of the underdog. And he becomes very wealthy through car dealerships. And then one day somebody asks him to go to a young offenders institution with him, to go and visit a prison. So he goes to this prison, and he gets there, and he says to the governor, when I got there, you've got 450 guys in here at the moment. How many of them used to be in care? How many of them were, you know, when they were children, were in care? And she said 65%, so 2/3. I said, dear me, where do they go when they come out? She said, you see that roundabout at the end of the road? That's about as far as they get, because they come straight back in. And so at that moment, that was his kind of dawning realization, his event. And he thought to himself, that must be why I'm here, to do something about that. And the governor said to him, you know, they've got no family to come out to, no home to come out to, no job to come out to. So he set about giving these care leavers what they needed. He gets he buys an ex-bishop's house. He gets 40 guys in there who were all guys who were living on the street, who were in prison, in and out of prison, off mainly drug and alcohol addicted guys. He gets them off the drink, off the drugs, and they find a home to live in, community to belong to, and meaningful work, the three things that they needed. But the story of George was that his daughter was born with several things wrong with her heart. She had a hole in her heart and various other things. The doctors had never seen all these things together. And at one point they said to them, you've got 22 minutes to decide whether she lives or dies. So obviously she was on life support and for a while, but now she's completely normal. They fixed everything and you wouldn't know. But he has he goes when he goes to visit the hospital which he provided some money for in Newcastle. He sees all these kids with wires, and he thinks, I'm helping them to survive. So his story, his kind of landmark event, is now what he's doing in the Northeast in the hospitals. And he said he got a jacuzzi in for kids that have their legs in calipers. They're sort of things to kind of straighten the legs, and they can go to this jacuzzi and they can feel the bubbles around their legs. And he said the look on their faces was just amazing. So these sort of tragedies or near tragedies can be used positively to help other people.
Thanks a lot, Mairi. We have already a few other questions in the chat. What I suggest is to keep them in mind. I will come back to them because they are super interesting, but we need to give the floor now to Etienne for the second presentation. So don't worry, Becky and Emmanuel, we'll take your questions later, but I would like to invite now Etienne to take the floor for the second presentation. Thank you so much again, Mairi and Charles, for sharing your research, and we'll get back to you for the discussion afterwards.
Thank you, Arthur. I hope everyone can hear me well. It's good to be with everyone. Let me share my screen. Understanding the sounds works. Does that work like that? Does everyone see it?
Yes, that's perfect.
Fine. Okay, excellent. So thank you so much. It's very nice to be on the 50th landmarks. I mean, it's very humbling for everyone who joined such a journey you have led us through, and probably the journey of the entrepreneur has also been an entrepreneur journey for you out there in the center. So congratulations. I'm feel very excited about the talk we have, and I have to be honest to say that I didn't know Mairi's works, but I find the way you provide reflections around the notions of guidance and guide is an interesting one. And when I was listening to your presentation, I was reflecting if the guidance of a guide anchored the status quo or the change. That was my reflections. But let's have now the presentation on my side. As you mentioned, Arthur, I've been active as a practitioner for the last 20 years. I see some names on joining the webinar today, which we know, so it's very exciting to be also with former colleagues or friends. And the one we have was to start a philanthropy advisory boutique 20 years ago, and we do celebrate, as you said, after 20 years. And the book I'm going to share with you is really the reflections of also my own journey working with families all over the years, and of my partners, since many things you do with others. And the Family Philanthropy Navigator is actually a book that was published, as you said it, Arthur, from IMD, so Peter Fogel, myself, and Malgorzata Schmolitz. But it's also the reflection led by an entrepreneur who decided to create a chair, because when he was attending IMD classes on leading family business classes, on leading family office classes, he was struck by the fact that, so many were not that organized to give while living or to give while being entrepreneur. So that journey of the book I'm going to share with you, which is an experience in which also an encounter of practitioners and professor, is that exact topic of how can you be being good at doing good, but also doing the right things and the things right. So the subtitle of the book is The Inspirational Guide for Family Philanthropy on the Giving Journey. So I think we're acquainted with what Arthur you're providing us today. So yes. I wanted maybe one thing I wanted to say, and which I come with a quote there. The quote is the reflections, and I think in that sense, to me, philanthropy is not only the conversation of the elite. I think the philanthropy is the recognitions, and that I try to highlight with that quote, that empathy comes from the stomach, generosity from the heart, and philanthropy from the head. For us, philanthropy is open to everyone, but it's also true that philanthropy is something that you start to think through when you want to be more systematic. All of us are generous, and or most of us, probably the one who attends. I think it's a natural thing to be as you build relationship with humans, or you notice the chance you had. But philanthropy, I think it's something that adds to the others. It's really how you get things organized. And very often, my experience is that, as you describe it, Mairi, from the testimonials, it's an inner journey before to be a structural process. And what we're going to present you today from our work is how to structure that process. So that's what I wanted to say as an introduction. So the ideas of the navigators is to simplify complexity to add value. It's things are hectic. You don't create changes in public good. Philanthropists can make a huge difference unless they reflect on the complexity. If it was easy to solve global issue, public interest, it would be long done. So there is an issue how to help people. And what we've done with the Family Philanthropy Navigators is to recognize that people who give while living, most of the time, there is a dimensions of the family. You mentioned, Mairi, the couples, the journey of two of the next generations, or also from the previous generations. So this can be the story of 2 or 3 generations. And so we get inspired by the work of someone you might know. Many of you might know, I know you've been teaching business school, and we are at ESSEC in a business school, of the business model Canva, which I think was an interesting reflections of Alexander Stovalders in Switzerland and Mr. Prieur, the co-authors, to say, how can we simplify the complexity of innovation within companies? And that book has been very successful. I know Alexander for a while, and when we started the reflection of the book, we said, Alex, what can we do that can be of help? Because the idea of a book is not so much to write it and to be read from our perspective as practitioners. So he helped us to think that the book should be something that actually, some of the book by scholar, as you do, needs to be read from the beginning to the end. And there is a great value. And I read like many of us books. But on philanthropy, we wanted to have something practical, something that people will use, something that will inspire people. So Alex helped us to say, you need to do something where you can scroll the book. And when actually it's not about reading from A to Z, but you're going to be able to find what you're looking for. So I think that was a useful insight as we started this process. So we've developed, the book exists. It was translated in French 6 months ago. There is plan for other translations, but it's not an end in itself. And the idea is that the book, I'm going to go a little bit more in details, because I think that the idea is also of that afternoon, while I hope in the conversation we can provide more insight also on how things can be done, is to provide insight on the book, but also tools. Because I think what we really need to do is to help people actually to simplify complexity. I think too often when we walk the talk with clients or we as advisor, we tend to make things more complicated than what they are. And I think giving is not so complicated. Create change as a complexity. But if you ask yourself the right questions, and all the questions are as relevant as they looks like, so you should order your questions. So that navigators that you can see, which I will go into more details, is about highlighting some of the questions we think are more important than others. So the navigators, as I said, it's more than a book. So you have the navigator, which I'll go in next slides a little bit more in details. There are also case studies. I will go also a bit more in details. I will present one. And there are also activities and trade-offs. So the idea is to create ownership in a book for people that want, to find that first milestone that you described, Mairi, when you said that guy in south of France, I think it was Garrett, how he was actually lost. So the idea is to help people, because if it's a new journey or new endeavors, you need some level of guidance in a written format or to a person. So if I go into the navigator itself. So in life, we don't do things for the how. We do things because of the why. I mean, we are all moved because we answer to that big question of why. So we think that the first big questions you need to address is to respond to the question of why. Why do we want to do such things? And Mairi give us some insight with 6 or 7 topics, or I think 5 or 6 on making a difference. So, but it is important in your reflecting on your purpose to look at your own motivations. And when I mean own, my experience is that very often the philanthropy journey, as it starts with the reflection of one before to become the project of many. But it has to become the project of many. You don't do public good on your own. But you don't do an entrepreneurial journey neither on your own. I mean, you need others. So I think it's about the same. So the motivation is very important. And the same talk, the parallel to motivation is also to set up your ambitions. I think it's very important to say what success can be in philanthropy. It's not because you do tough topic, you address issues that are challenging, that you can't set yourself a goal. And in reality, if you have a goal or reflections where you want to add that, you're more likely to go there. And we're not talking uniquely KPI, but say, what do we want it to be? And I say that because I think, especially in family philanthropy, we sometimes expect that philanthropy has a very deep meaning for a family, but unless, and if so, unless you create activities to engage the family, it's not going to happen spontaneously. So, you know, sometimes and it's like any project, if you want to achieve something, then you have to create something to reach there. So the ambitions is a very important one. The focus is one which is obvious to many of you. The relationship is really with whom. That's an important one. And with whom means on one side your family, so who in your family, and at what conditions, and on the other sense, or at what legitimacy, one could also say, or what kind of burden do you want to project over generations? It's opportunities, it's a question of perspective, but let's state out clearly. And the notion of partners, you have to do. And that's what I find interesting, Mairi, in your presentation. I also think that actually we need not to fool ourselves as when we advise philanthropists. Certainly money is power and resources are very useful to create changes. But a foundations as a tools without project it can funds doesn't make any sense. Like an investors without private equity opportunity or creating your own company doesn't create anything. So in reality, yes, when you're at the scale of a very large donors, like there are some in the US, you are very substantial as the change makers. But the vast majority of people who are philanthropists will need absolutely good people to work with. So yes, I think philanthropists can have an influence on public policy issues. But I also think that the biggest responsibility is to choose partners that they can fund and that they can listen to, because in reality, those are the ones that are going to create long-lasting change in society. So yes, there is a power, but I think it's also relatively powers compared to how you connect with others. So that notion of with whom is a very important one. The last one on the organizations is how. So in reality, it's about the resources, it's about the structure and the governance, and it's about the impact. I stress that it comes last because I think too often you think philanthropy around the vehicles and the wealth planning. I'm not a very, I think sometimes it's the wrong way to look at it. And sometimes if you look at the tools before to have the visions, you might create the wrong tools. So in that sense, I think the notions of creating a reflection on governance, how you take decisions, what kind of vehicles, and I do see that entrepreneurs are very sensitive of the agility as much as the legitimacy. So sometimes your own foundation, depending on jurisdictions, is the great things to do. On other jurisdictions, it's not the best things to do. Not that it actually it's not good, but it's very rigid, it's very hard to lead, and there is DAF and other options that are as well recognized and regulated, because that's not about escaping regulation, it's about the agility of evolving in your giving. And on the resources, I also think, and I think you said it, I like that sentences of resources around the 40, the treasure, the talent, the times, and the ties. I think this is a big reflections, and people, entrepreneur, when they give, have definitely some additional skills. And I think that's good to be actually put into the table as a reflections. And it's even more good because sometimes they can be great added value, but sometimes they can also create tensions depending on the projection. So that would be about the navigator itself. And those 8 questions, which we believe, if you start with that, you well landed. Maybe some are more clearer than others, but it's certainly something that is very important. We also included case studies. I will present you one, but I think our choices while writing the books, and I'm based in Switzerland, so is MD also, and Peter is American and Austrian. The idea was to have case studies which are outside of the US, because so much has been written in the US. And we recognize that actually the Anglo-Saxon philanthropy is very inspiring by its scale, but it's also somehow quite exceptional by its setup. I mean, because at the end of the day, philanthropy is evolved within one societies, and the way the US and UK are organized is a way to look at societies. And we think that actually our added value was to provide other cases. So you have on each of the chapters, you have case studies, and here I've highlighted one of the Junicler, which is a family which is based now in Luxembourg, but you have also other 2 with the Tsao family, and also have Alström in Finland. We've also case studies in relationships or with whom you work, you might remember. So, it's done with color coding. Hopefully it's easy to read or make it attractive. And I'm going to present you one to see that we've tried actually those case studies focus on the 2 or 3 questions so that actually you get insight. And we have thought that actually the families with whom we work and some are presented in the case studies or some are connected with IMD are the one that we wanted actually to highlight because we wanted real stories, something that actually people speak with their head and with their hearts, but of real experience. So that's the case studies after the navigators. We also had put some trade-off. My experience is that the choice of giving is led by many tensions. And those tensions can vary as a perceptions within families. Now I put the reactive and proactive, which is an obvious one. Do I choose organizations which I want to support? Do I do a call for proposals? And it's a good conversation to have to see where do you stand, because maybe within your family, there is different approach. And I think too often we led families to discuss vehicles or focus the topic they want to choose. But I think defining the approach is actually what's really interesting, because I think on what you can have disagreement, but on how you give and why you give, families have very strong alignment. It's all about the value, the behavior, the DNA. So it is the inspirational journey to take that picture, which I think is the navigators taking a picture. We also try to look at some practical tips. And so we look, again, it's a practical book. So we put looking at independent board members. I think it's a very important topic. I'm always amazed how successful entrepreneur will include within their business external board members with specific expertise, and within philanthropy, sometimes remain among themselves. I don't criticize that, but I think the fact that you've highlighted, Mairi, the guidance, the role of the guide, just stressed me the idea that actually having independent board member or invited guests that can lead conversations, it makes all difference within families and entrepreneurs. If you want to play within roles that are redefined, which I think is also part of the philanthropy journey. Managing conflict of interest is a big one. Engage the next generation is a big one. So tips, what do you do with young children, adolescents, what the good way? So we provide some tips. Picking up a name. I know it sounds anecdotal, so we've also published a few years back after great books on the philanthropy journey and strategic philanthropy, where the notions of the names was also highlighted. But so I think it's also questions when you have public appearance, something that would, deserve reflections, and we try to provide tips. I have one slide as Arthur. I have to say that listening to Mairi, I've added one slide, not to make it longer, but while listening to you, I think that one of my experience working, we as WISE work currently with 20 families. We have worked also with previous family that have stopped working with us and new one that will start in the futures. But I've learned that actually there is indeed a journey, and there is also a journey of what I would call decentralization. So when it starts about the philanthropy, and Mairi, you said it, sometimes it's an accident of life, sometimes it's something you missed in life, or sometimes it's, what you call the key, I don't remember how you call those, but the defining moments. And very often there, it's your reflections. It's me and myself and my philanthropy. But very quickly, you build on stage 2 an ecosystem, because it's actually, if you want to do philanthropy, very often it reflects on, if it's about your mother who passed away and your kids, then it's also about how do I relate to them and who is my family and my inner circles. And I think very often it's connected with the next project in life, or it's connected with including philanthropy within my entrepreneurial journey. And then you can do it yourself and you build your own structure after reflection. My experience at the stage 3 is a critical one, because in reality, if you stay at stage 2 in your journey, you're missing the essence of philanthropy. What is philanthropy all about? It's about having the space for the others you don't know. And giving is something we all do. We give to our children, we give to our friends, and we give to the one we don't know. So the notion of giving is not related to philanthropy only. But that notion in philanthropy to give to the others I don't know is something that needs a decentralization. And I think that philanthropy becomes very powerful when you not only think yourself, but as a learning journey where actually you have the space for the family that can challenge your visions as the founders, but it's also of the partners and the beneficiaries. Because in reality, if you're not able to understand and share governance or find mechanisms to include in decision making. And I have numerous examples for conversations. I can't state them now, but I think that's very relevant, and that should be thought as such. So it's how do I move from the I to the we to the us? I think that's if I, in few words. Arthur, I have a couple of minutes more. Can I go through the next slides?
Yes, maybe 2 minutes, that would be perfect.
Perfect, and I'll be done in 2 minutes. I've also tried to put some elements, practical elements, when we use the navigators more than other times. We think that actually, and I think, Mairi, you have done something very similar. When philanthropy become more organized in a family, that's what I stated initially, you can give punctually and regularly, but when you want to get more organized, it's probably good to think what are some of the key questions we need to address. When you create your foundations, I mean, is it a sheltered fund or a DAF? This is also a good time, not only to define on the topic, or the bylaw, but really how do you want to approach it and how do you get organized? Liquidity events is certainly something. The younger generations get more involved, or the senior generation step out. Many stories. My experience is that, and that's going to help me on the next slide, is that I think philanthropy, because it's all about helping the others, is also a very interesting place for families to adjust themselves across generations and also to share divergence. And I'm not naive on philanthropy. I've experienced lots of emotions and sometimes regulation across families because you see things differently. And here it's not academic research. It's a slide I use from my experience. But I do think that the notion of giving back is not the view of every generation. And the younger generation would probably claim stop taking instead of start giving back. So I think that sometimes we need to be very aware that actually people maybe mean the same thing, but say other things. So on generosity responsibly. But if you take the second line, grandparents or the elder generation would think, I help people because I trust them. I think the generations of our parents of my age, the 40s, 50s, would say, yes, we trust, but we verify. We want to make sure things happen. And I think the younger generation has a strong say to say, you know, let's be coherent. And that's why I think, if I can make a comment on that slide, is that philanthropy can regulate families, but it has to be cautiously led because it can also create divergence. Quick case studies, which I think just to highlight what you can have in a case studies, just to close my presentations and before to launch the conversations. I today sit in the office of that family, of the Morvenay family. I have a board at 2. So it makes sense. It was not planned as such, but it happens as such. But I think it's a highlight also, one of the cases that you find in the book is to say, we've tried, and that's the case of the organization. So that family is organized, they've been very successful, and they are entrepreneurs in the pharmaceutical business, as you can see, but also in the private equity. And they've organized themselves with the foundations, which is called the Fondation Philanthropic Next, with the round in the middle. And there is obviously the family company, but there is also a foundation to support in emergency cases the employees. So it's about taking the different dimensions. My experience with that family, and which I think is one of the point of conversations, is that I have a different view from Mairi. I don't think it's a journey from entrepreneurials to philanthropy. I think the world is changing, and I think this is where philanthropy is included within your philanthropy as entrepreneur. I think the challenges are so great that successful entrepreneurs do completely realize that you can wait to turn 70 or liquidity events or wealth owners. If they're entrepreneurs, and I make a difference between entrepreneur and wealth owners, if you're an entrepreneur, then you will start finding ways to give back, but also to create purpose and express values while you live. I think this is a very important element. It's not stage of life from my perspective. And I think this is how society is changing among the elements of coherence. And philanthropy at the end is a way to get your value expressed in a different ways, and employers expect also from the family-owned business, when that's such a case, to have also to share, you know, what they do as business and wealth owners, as entrepreneurs. So here you can see, you will find in the book practical cases, because we are about organizations, it's about resources, finance, governance, and impact. And here you can see what is shared is that in that specific cases, you know, it's the importance of creating change while you give. And it's interesting, and I make the analogy and that's my last slide. Impact takes time. My experience is that entrepreneurs, depending on where they create their wealth, that will have a huge influence on the way they do philanthropy. in the pharmaceutical industry, for the one that are in the room with us, it takes time, research, to find patterns, to find license. So that family has a DNA to expect things taking times, and their philanthropy is meant in the same sense. So they care about impact, but they know impact takes time. So they support fewer on a longer time perspective. And the same way, they also once, and that you can see some of the key recommendations. I mean, you're going to have the slides, I'm sure, so you can see, but the notions of being committed and engaged. So for them, they do things while they're very busy as entrepreneur and as a family. So it's not about something you would do later in life, because that experience will create also resonance in decision you take in the business. So I'm absolutely convinced that the entrepreneur today are not expecting stages of life, but the world itself is changing so dramatically. The younger generation within companies, the younger generations within, and the issue at stake in society make them think that actually this is something you start while living. So just as a closing comments, and I look forward to these conversations.
Thank you very much, Etienne, for sharing this this knowledge with us. I'm very happy to open now the floor for questions and comments. I think we will put your both Mairi, Charles, and you in highlight to take questions. So I would like maybe to start with putting one of the questions in the chat for Mairi and Charles, and maybe Etienne, you can chime in as well. There was a question of Becky. Did your research give you any insight into one can stop or put off entrepreneurs from actually giving or engaging with some charitable organizations? Maybe, talking about barriers or things that could turn off these, profiles of entrepreneurs doing philanthropy. Do you have any elements on that you want to share?
Well, I think sometimes things can go wrong. So there was one interview that we interviewed who said that he had a project in Africa, and it was about helping kids who were born with HIV. And so they were paying for all these antiretroviral drugs or whatever they're called. And they were saying every time they saw their kids, they were saying, "You're taking your medicine, yes, yes, yes." But they found out later that the doctors were giving them placebos and the drugs were being sold on the black market. And he said, it's not that it stopped what he was doing, but it left him for a while in a bit of limbo. And he said it took longer to get onto the next project. And he said he had kind of come to terms that with things wouldn't always work out. And he said it didn't drive him as nuts as it used to, but it still got to him. So I think sometimes when things go wrong, that may be a rut in the road, but hopefully they would still continue.
Thank you, Mairi. Charles, do you want to add something? I think you raised your hand.
I think that probably says it all. Can I just say how much I agree with a lot of what Etienne said there, and especially about the point that it's not stages of life that you can easily predict, and that there are phases and overlaps. There is, of course, the fact that it's a locus of interest at different points in life, and that you will be more engaged with philanthropy at different stages than others. I just think that's a useful clarification. On the being put off, I've never known anyone be completely put off by failures or setbacks, but they are knocked back in the way that Mairi described, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Etienne, any comment, or do you want to go to the next question? It's up to you.
I think to that question is also the question of, I guess, of how can I fundraise better with entrepreneurs to make sure that supports me. I think entrepreneurs have a certain visions of what entrepreneur mindset be, and I think that's why I don't oppose entrepreneur to philanthropy. It's because an entrepreneur has a lot in common with a social entrepreneur leading a social justice or an environmental organization. So, in reality, I think it's to that questions. I think the funding works well when it's also in encounters, because that's what not all donors, entrepreneurs are the largest American foundations. There are lots of people that are entrepreneurs in their own way where the resources are limited, but they want to have focus. So I think it has to be often encounters where you can play the words and you can walk the talk. And I think, as Charles said, entrepreneurs understand failures. What they don't accept is mediocrity. So in reality, I think it's about building a strong relationship and being very blunt about your challenge and describing together the journey you want to be in. It can be quite time intensive for an NGO leaders. And that's where I think the guide is also often a helpful one, like the staff within the foundations with professionals.
Thank you. That's great. We also had a question about gender differences. Emmanuel mentioned that the first names that you used, Mairi, during the presentation were mostly male. So I think maybe if I can generalize the question, in your experience, both as researchers and also Etienne as an advisor, can you see patterns of gender differences in the way, philanthropists go about their journey, or is it not something that is, quite gendered in a sense, in your own view? Do you want to start maybe, Mairi?
Yeah, well, I mean, of the first group of 20 that we interviewed, only 4 were women. And these 4, they had become philanthropic in conjunction with their spouse or partner. So very often it was, in the particular quote that I mentioned, where this lady said, we have to go on this journey together, it was actually the partner who was a hedge funder who had made all the money. And then she was getting involved in more of the philanthropy. He was too. When they divorced, it was actually at the time the most expensive divorce in the UK. But yeah, I haven't particularly, apart from to say that they were involved in conjunction with their partner, we haven't particularly noticed any gender differences. There was one lady who said that, Elena's question earlier about contradictions is quite interesting, because we found instances in the interviews where philanthropists would talk about laying off workers, and she made a point of said, when I've got to lay off workers, I will drive there and I will go and I will tell them myself, which, might be seen as kind of more masculine behavior, one might think. But she made a point of regarding it as something that she had to do. And she sort of saw a point of virtue in that, when, of course, she's actually laying off workers. And other business people, entrepreneurs, might see themselves as being philanthropic simply by employing people and keeping them in a job. But no, we haven't. Apart from that, I can't say we've noticed any particular gender differences, but most of them were indeed male.
Thank you, Mairi. Etienne, any comment on this?
Yeah, I think it's a question that keeps on coming, and I think which is a relevant one. When it's about philanthropy, it's often about couples and different, and very often the mothers plays a big role in that decision making, from my experience. But as our topic today is the journey of entrepreneur, the reality of who is actually entrepreneurs, and today is just a reflection of the testimony you've had, Mairi. So I think your sample just reflect the fact that entrepreneurs that are successful and that sell companies probably reflections, that sample is the reflections of the reality. I think sometimes it's really interesting the way philanthropy can be help the role also of women within families. And for the one that have read the book, the Eva Alström Foundations in Finland, of Maria Bodestam, it's a really interesting case, is the way she was able, I think it was 14 of the female members who created the foundations and made really a statement by naming foundations with the name of the grandmothers to give her a place. And that family transformations through the role of women as leaderships in the space that was given, which was not, from my understanding, the business, but the philanthropy, has created a system change in the family. So I think I would say, any difference is noticeable. But I do think your sample is just by definition to reflect our reality. Philanthropy can certainly be led by women, and I think this is a chance of us filled, because women will change the world, certainly for the better.
I think that's a really important point that you make about the women very often leading this system change in the family. We've come across that as well, that it was in a situation where they had a landmark liquidity event, it was actually the woman who was talking to the man saying, no, we have to get involved in philanthropy, we have to give it away.
Well, that was a rare example of a joint interview where we interviewed both of the man and the woman together. And it was a wonderful dialogue between the two of them. I didn't detect any particular differences there, other than that she was the driver of them becoming very actively engaged in philanthropy. He was very much more concerned with effective philanthropy, measurement of impact and those kinds of things than she was, but she was certainly driving the process, and it was very, very interesting thing.
Thank you. We have also an interesting question regarding differences across countries and culture in the chat. I know that, Etienne, you've worked with families in Switzerland, but you probably worked in France as well. Mairi and Charles, I know that you have lived in France, and Mairi, you have also taught in France, and I think you did some research on business elites in France as well. So the question would be, would there be any difference? It's a hypothesis maybe, but would there be any major difference between entrepreneurs doing philanthropy in France versus the UK and versus Switzerland? Do you have any ideas or reflections on this? It's a difficult question, I know, but
it is a difficult question, and for that reason, I'd like to hand it over to Etienne.
I certainly have an opinion. What if I can make use an old story to answer that questions? It was very interesting when Notre Dame burned, who actually some of the very successful entrepreneurs decided overnight to support funding the restoration of Notre Dame, and it was very criticized in the public debate. I think when you give, you always give locally. And if you're a global citizen as a donors, in reality, you will also give locally. So I think if that would have happened in New York, everyone would have applauded. I think in France, you have to express it differently because people have a different connections with, and same in the French-speaking area with the relations of wealth, and only publicize your success and play that public role. So I think philanthropy is always welcome, but you have to play with some different rules in the way you appear publicly or you explain what you do. So I do think that there are huge difference. But I also think this is not only about languages. I think also religious traditions create also a big difference. The way actually your country has been, playing a big role in global affairs, or is very discreet, play different roles. I see people. So I think I think the big lesson learned is that you always give locally. I mean, you can be any global citizens, your connections, your reputations is where you come from, because there can be a suspicions or there can be a great welcoming. And that's not always the same. And so I don't draw generalizations, but I think we should be very humble when we want to do good and consider local culture.
I think that's really important, and it's something we've come across a lot in our research. And one of the points that we make at the end is philanthropists should only get involved in things they know, understand, and can work with. And that is going to apply so much more when it's local, when it's a local community that they really understand. But the example of Notre Dame is a really interesting one. So when I was living in Paris many years ago, I had a little flat on the 6th floor at the Boulevard Saint-Germain, and I could see Notre Dame from my window. I could also see the Rue de Bièvre, where Mitterrand at the time, he used to have gendarmes stationed at either side of it down below me. But Notre Dame is a powerful, motivating thing, and it was tragic to see it burning down. But interestingly, years ago, I used to live in York, and the same thing happened there. The York Cathedral was struck by lightning and went up in flames. And again, like Notre Dame, they have no maps. They have no maps to work from how to repair it. So it would be really interesting to go and compare the campaign to rebuild York Cathedral with the campaign to rebuild Notre Dame. Obviously, Notre Dame was kind of a global campaign with people contributing around the world, which was very interesting in its own right, and it's wonderful to see it being restored.
Could I make a general point? So one of our projects just coming to fruition is the analysis of the $1 million giving lists in the United States between 2000 and 2016. And we've recoded 90,000 gifts. Okay, so it's 90,000. It's a huge survey. Some of the things that really strike you about the American system, as opposed to, say, the British or European system, is how slick the system is as a whole. So there are far more advisors, there are far more people supporting the philanthropic system as a whole. And it's a really quite impressive thing. But even given that, what Etienne said is entirely correct. The majority of the funds that Americans earn abroad, the surpluses they earn abroad, are ploughed back into philanthropy in the United States, not into international philanthropy. The Gates Foundation is an exception, not a rule. And so the vast amount of cash actually goes back into local causes. Think, for example, of the Lilly family in Illinois. That would be a more typical example of what happens to the money. So localism and its predominance is important. So one of the challenges to philanthropy is how to become more international and how to actually redistribute funds and projects internationally and how to manage these better. And I think that's one of the very big challenges. How do you actually do that? But the American system is wonderfully supported. That's what I would say. And the relationship, say universities, the number of philanthropy advisors in universities in the States dwarfs that of the rest of the world put together and multiplied by many, many times. So there's a ready interface in the giving that works extremely well. So there is something to learn there, I think, from the American system. But the international issue is a very important one, I think.
Thank you very much to the three of you. We are running a little bit out of time for addressing all the questions that we had in the chat. Maybe a final one is, I think, a reflection. So I'm merging two questions of the chat and one question by my own. I think it is related to Etienne's point. I think we are probably living in an era in which doing business on the one hand and then doing philanthropy on the other hand with no connection whatsoever between the two and maybe some hypocrisy or some discrepancies between the two is more and more difficult to do because of watchdog organizations, the media, and also pressure from the younger generation. So the problem now is that we have this, and it's one of the questions in the chat. Couldn't you be a philanthropist just by being a better person in your business activity? So maybe I will just end on this final question. Are these separated spheres? Is it possible to keep them separated? And in the world of today, maybe Etienne and then Mairi and Charles to conclude on that.
Yeah, I think it's really cool questions. I think philanthropy for entrepreneur is not a box to tick at the end of your life. So it's something you have lived through. And entrepreneur, their DNA is to create value for society. There's a company, but also for society at large. So my experience is that I think it's rapidly changing. But again, I think it's not a either or. And I don't think it's about only creating good business and stopping philanthropy. I think it's end-to-end. It's doing both. I do think that companies are evolving just because also for hiring talents, just to be good companies. I mean, people expect more from the companies. So I think the business is changing. B Corp movement, Michelin and company is changing. So I think we should do no mistakes. But at the same time, I think we should also be aware that actually there is a wealth inequality which is growing. And I do think, so that would be my final point, that the idea that actually the wealth we transfer across generations should only be materials is fooling ourselves. The reality, successful entrepreneur that led successful entrepreneurial journey across generations need to transfer immaterial wealth. Immaterial wealth is not only the money you give to the next generation or the company, it's also the value, the behavior, the responsibility, and the caring, the value you care. So I think philanthropy there is a wonderful tool. And I think we should be putting ourselves in a complex world to say philanthropy is the story of the past. I think it should be cleverly used, but I think it'll be so important for entrepreneurs to create value for society to think immaterial wealth encompass also philanthropy and the redistribution of wealth.
Thank you, Etienne. Charles and Mairi, maybe a final word on this?
Yeah, there's huge overlaps between entrepreneurship and philanthropy, absolutely massive. The people that we've met all use what they've learned in business in their philanthropy. They come to philanthropy in the same way as they approach business. So there's massive overlaps. And I think maybe in this talk, it's looked that we've been talking about separate spheres. No, we haven't. But one point to stress is that the people we've interviewed, it's all individual business giving that we've been looking at. We haven't been looking at corporate philanthropy. The dean of my business school, he began with corporate philanthropy. Steve Brammer did a lot of work on that. But and sometimes in those cases, companies may be doing it perhaps not for the best of reasons, but to look good. So yeah, we focused on individuals in our research. I'll hand over to Charles now.
Okay, well, it's not either or, as Etienne clearly said, and I think there's plainly a role for both. If you look at the United States system and the $90,000 million plus gifts, the vast majority are from private individuals. The vast majority of the money that is redistributed into philanthropy is from private individuals. It's not from companies. So there's a tendency, I think, to exaggerate the extent of corporate philanthropy. It's large, it's significant, and it's important, but it is not the last word. And also, when you speak of corporate philanthropy in the States, a lot of it is giving through to local organizations that are involved in frontline charitable giving. A lot of the money actually comes from the employees. If you look at the Boeing corporate philanthropy, a lot of it is the individual employees who are engaged through giving schemes and so on. But there's a place for the whole panoply of giving, providing it's effective in what it does. And I was to say, Etienne, wonderful book. I'll definitely recommend it because it's emphatically needed. And I agreed with almost everything you said in there. But as you refine it through the editions, I think perhaps some mention of theory of change and actually being able to robustly test your ideas when you finish the final slide with impact. I was very impressed by that. So if you're a family and you're just supporting causes, that's an effective philanthropy issue. If you're leading causes and leading projects, then the theory of change approach becomes, I think, very important and being able to use that. It was the only thought I had, but I think it's a wonderful thing you've done. Thank you.
Thank you to all three of you. I'm really happy to have this conversation with us. Thank you all also to all of you in the room for your very nice questions, and I hope we were able to address most of them. There are many resources that you can find in the chat. I just want to share one final slide with you, just to give you a little teaser of what's next for the Philanthropy Chair. So this is more for our French-speaking audience, but we have this podcast, La Philanthropie en Question, that is beautifully arranged by my colleagues Anne and Gaëtan. Episode 27 on philanthropy for mental health is online. You can find it on all your, platforms for podcasts. The infographic that I showed will be online soon and sent. And we also have, we have reached now more than 1,000 followers on LinkedIn. We switched platforms. We decided to quit X, Twitter, for both ethical and pragmatic reasons. So follow us on LinkedIn, and a new format, showcasing ideas from our 51st Lunch and Learn episodes will be shared with you over the next month. So thank you again to all our presenters, participants. It was great to have this conversation with you. And we will see you probably in April for our next Lunch and Learn seminar. It will be, I think, on local philanthropy and the Fondation de Territoire in French. Thanks a lot, Mairi, Charles, Etienne. It was great to have you. Thanks to my team. and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye, everybody. Lovely to
Bye,
see
everyone.
you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye.